No, got it. It's all good.
Okay. So just to reiterate, so you're asking basically if Naginata would ever be used on horseback. I can't say 100% accurately because I'm not a scholar in Naginata, but I cannot see it being used effectively the way that we learn to use the Naginata. I mean, there's no reason to say you couldn't use it in some techniques. It's such a long weapon, and the way it's used, I don't think it'd be so practical. Definitely against cavalry, barricades, against infantry, ship to ship where you want the reach. I'm just going to pull out the diction that I've got over here. So if you imagine this is an idealized Naginata. So it's about 2¼ meters long. And one of the features of a Naginata is generally that you have a curved blade. Historically, Naginatas came in all kinds of shapes and sizes. It was literally a long handle with a blade on the end. So it might be short, it might be long. The ratio of the blade to the handle could change. So you really want to kind of see a specific styling when it gets used as more of a military weapon, I guess. And then you get more of a standardization process to it. But the way you use a Naginata, it's mostly, especially in kind of the atarashii or the sports style, it's more about keeping distance. So if you imagine you're riding on a horse, our basic technique is to have our hands at the back of the weapon. So trying to use that on horseback is a little bit awkward. You're just as likely to hit your horse. And it's going to be a little bit more awkward. Some of the many key features about Naginata is that we do change sides, we work on both sides of the body. So even just our basic Furikaeshi men, we're changing stance, we're twisting our body. Something like hustle, it requires that rotation of the body to get that. So if I'm trying to ride horseback, right, here you go. You could necessarily reach over, but you couldn't really do hustle easily because you're going to hit the horse you're riding on, for example, or trying to do Furikaeshi is not going to work there. One of the other techniques called Furukayashi is basically a water wheel. So I'll try and show you here. It's a full rotation of the body with the weapon coming up above the head and changing sides.
Well, can you show me that one more time? Sorry.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite ones. So I'll try and give you a bit of a better angle of the upward movement or the changeover.
I've given up on my screen sharing, but I'm going to try that.
That's okay. So this one it's one of the last techniques we teach you. Simply because it requires, that's okay. It requires a lot of coordination of different techniques. So I'll try and do it so you can see it from the front. So again, this is not something you could really do when you're astride a horse. The angle of it is just not going to work particularly well. So yeah, against horses, against barricades, ship to ship, absolutely fine. Against infantry or swords, not a problem. In fact, against any other kind of land-based weapon, you could certainly use a Naginata, but I wouldn't try and do it riding on a horse. We do have a few thrusting movements. So we use it in techniques for nodo, so going for the throat, or do, where it'll be more of a thrust through using the backhand to power the movement. But most of our techniques are more about a slicing, cutting motion, if that makes sense.
So most of this seems to be powered by the backhand with the front hand only as guidance. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And that's something that tends to be a little bit harder for people to get used to when you're using a weapon, because instinctively, I think most of us go front hand. It's closer to your target. That's where people use the power, but it's actually harder on your body, and it's not as effective. You end up tiring yourself out more. So again, I'll try and show you here. Just doing basic Furikaeshi men. So from this point here, this is technically my front hand at the moment, but it will be my backhand when I finish the strike. And you can see from that, it's coming all the way from above my head and doing a kind of a semicircle, an arc all around the body. And you can imagine the amount of force that generates just in that rotation. I've got a big arc, a lot of momentum, a lot of power. what would have been my front hand when I start comes up, it's at the back, and it's only going from here up above my head to here. That's a very small arc.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people will try and use that front arm to power their movements. And what they're doing is they're requiring the arm, the shoulder, their body to do that power. And so you're basically wasting a lot of energy and efficiency by doing that. Whereas my backhand is going up. I mean, you just feel the swing of that. If you just swing your arm up and down,
Yep.
that's a lot more power than going head to here. You can't generate the same amount of power without involving the rest of your body.
Yep. Yeah. So you don't need to use legs or any of your body. It's literally just your back arm. There's no sort of from your toes sort of thing.
So there's a few different areas it comes from. But when you're talking about your arms, it's always going to be the backhand, or what ends up as the backhand generating the power. The front hand is more for guidance and for stopping it at the target point with your tenouchi, your grip. You do use your body and your torso and your hips. So there are some moves. I'll actually grab the broomstick handle for that. It's a little bit easier to show this.
Thank you for this, by the way.
No, look, these are great questions. And they're a good way to start understanding the nature of Naginata and just where you should be focusing your attention. A lot of these are kind of more, they're not things we'd worry about at the start when you're learning the movements, because everyone powers with the front hand to start with. It's just everyone's reaction. But as you can get a mental picture of how it works, it'll start making more sense, and your body movements will change, your technique will change to accommodate for that.
Yeah.
So we have one called waki no gamai, which is a stance for striking at door. So it's quite a long distance one. I'll switch between it again just for a second. So if you imagine that I have someone in front of me and I want to cut to their center, one technique we do is we actually turn this around and we slice through. And the reason I'm not going to keep doing that one is I'm going to hit the window. Here you can kind of see the same effect. So if you imagine that the screw at the top is where my handle, my blade is, sorry.
Yep.
Back of my weapon here. So some of the power is generated from what will be my backhand coming from out here into here. So it's a bit of a thrusting motion then. The rest of the power actually comes from a generation of my hips rotating. And this is another reason that, like we did in the first class last week, I'm talking about keeping the weapon close to your body at the end of a stride, in touch with it, making yourself part of the weapon, because that helps generate the power. And you're basically flipping it with your hips. So if I've got that here, blades at this end, you can imagine if I'm just rolling it over my hip here, that's a lot of power for very little input.
Yep.
So, and if you can imagine doing that with your whole body coming behind it and rotating it all the way through, that's a huge amount of power for very little effort. So the rotation of the body in Naginata, which is one of its key features, helps generate power. But it really does rely on you keeping the weapon in contact with your body, especially at the end of the strike.
Okay. So it's coming from your backhand, coming from your hips and some movements, never from the shoulders, never from the feet like it does in some other places, not from your...
Not exactly. I mean, they all play a little bit of a part. Obviously, you can't use your arms without your shoulders, but if you think that this is a weapon that's designed to use minimal energy for greatest effect.
Okay.
I mean, before it kind of became the female samurai weapon, obviously it was good for keeping people at bay. You'd be trying to fight a lot of people. So having that distance was amazing. It was fantastic. It was great. But you needed to obviously have a lot of body power. And obviously, as you're doing things more and more, you get tired more quickly. So using the least amount of energy to create the most effect is the most efficient way to use a weapon.
Okay.
So if I'm wearing myself out by constantly throwing my whole body into the movement when I don't need to, I'm going to be exhausted way earlier than I could be. I can't sustain my movements or my training for anywhere near as long.
Okay.
So yeah, it's very much about just conserving energy in a clever way. and using the weapon in the most efficient way possible.
I like it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
No,
So-
you're welcome. It's a great question.
I haven't told you what I do as a job, but basically I'm supposed to ask 50 million questions a day, and that's literally my job. So I do a lot of that.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's a great thing. A lot of people don't want to ask questions because they feel embarrassed. They think, it's a silly question. Whereas my view is, if you need to ask about it, it's not a silly question.
Something
You haven't been given that. Yeah, you haven't been given the information or the knowledge to be able to make those connections in your own head to make that logical leap. So it's not a silly question, especially when you're starting something that is weapons based and requires a whole lot of body movements that you may not be familiar with. So quite frankly, ask as many questions as you like. I think it's
Be afraid. So okay, so it's not the same as jousting lance. It's slightly different. And I'm guessing when it was an actual weapon, it would have been a little bit more tip heavy, because I'm guessing the tip would have been made of iron or something sharp and pointy.
You can actually get hold of a few replica Naginatas, and even if you're, say, overseas, some originals.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
I thought they were all destroyed.
You can always get hold of things if you know where to find there are a few people who make replicas. I train in another style, to the Habu Korea, and there's one gentleman there who has made his own replica. He managed to get hold of a Naginata blade, the Habu, which is quite long and heavy. It's full metal, and he created a handle to attach it to in a traditional fashion. And yes, it is very top heavy, and it makes a lot of sense of some of our movements. Again, if we're talking about something like Furikaeshi, where I'm coming up here, imagine all the weight is now behind me on this blade here. If I'm just relying on my front hand, that's a lot of weight that I have to pull with this left hand over the top. However, if all the weight's back here and I use my front hand, which is on the opposite side of the lever, I use this as my fulcrum, it's much easier.
You're letting
also,
gravity do the work.
And once I get here, exactly, the gravity will do half the job for you. So it doesn't make sense, especially if you've got something really heavy here, to be using the hand that's at the back and behind you, and it's pretty much at the center of the fulcrum to try and do the power, when you've got this lovely front arm, or what will become the back arm here, in a comparable position to the weight to pull it forward. Again, with something like our Furikaeshi that I was showing you before, so this one here, weight is at the back. If I try to do my power from where my hands are centered here, it will be really hard. But instead, I bring one hand forward and I use the other at the center as a fulcrum.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I need to modify what I was doing from last week, but that's okay, I'll get it.
One of the things is we don't try and get into that too early, especially when you're a beginner. We just want you to feel what the movements are. We can correct power later on. We do actually have some, I can't remember what they're called, but they get used a little bit for kendo, but they're a little rubberized cylinder that you can wrap around the blade area, so just around here, to add extra weight at the front of the weapon. And that helps simulate that additional weight, especially because when we use an atarashii naginata, it isn't all oak, so this is kind of an even balance. The atarashii's got the bamboo at the front, so it's lighter than the handle. Which again doesn't help you simulate that. So we can actually put a weight on the blade end to help simulate that extra weight, and you can feel where the gravity kicks
Would
in.
I be allowed to try that next time?
Absolutely, yeah. Anytime you like. Yeah. So
I feel like I'm taking over. I can ask lots more questions, or would you like to do a quick run through of what you wanted to do today?
This is entirely up to you. The nice thing sometimes when I'm doing a one-on-one, and I do this for my Jukendo group too, sometimes I just have one person, is you have the advantage of being able to have input. And again, I said this during our face-to-face beginners class last week. This shouldn't all be about us teaching you this, and this with no input. It's important for me to know what you're interested in and what helps you. And sometimes just these questions can help clarify a lot of that. So,
okay. I do have more questions. So I know that it's a long distance weapon, and I'm guessing it can be used, but I think I saw something online where you could use it on horses, or you can use it between ships, and they used it for all sorts of other things. What would happen though if you needed to use it as a shorter distance weapon?
Great question. So
I have
Naginata,
a lot.
these are fantastic questions. And they're not ones that a lot of beginners really consider, or if they do, they don't tend to ask about it because again, they feel a bit embarrassed about asking this question. Whereas these are excellent questions. And this comes into play into how we use Naginata. So with the face-to-face last week, we did do a couple of different positions. So we did Shudanokomai,
Yeah.
we did hustle,
Yep.
and Gedan, and a few others. What we
And
didn't
we
show
did
you is that we can change the length of the weapon at any time.
Okay.
So traditionally what we teach you is that we start with your elbow in line with the back of the handle, and that's
Yep.
pretty much where it stays. That's where it stays for Chudan. It's where it stays for hustle. It's where it stays for Waki, Jodan, Gedan. Pretty much stays that positioning or that distance. However, we can actually change it with what we call Kurikomi and kuridashi, which is a movement where we bring the weapon in,
Okay.
or kuridashi, where we send it out back to distance. So we can actually alter our distances. So last week we taught you one block for men, which is basically stepping back and lifting up.
Yeah.
The other block for men uses kurikomi, where we bring the weapon in. And we defend with our blade where our head was.
That's
But
what
that
you'd
relies-
use for attacking horses,
Yeah,
because there would be, you'd have use the ground to stabilize it. Would you? I don't know. Not that I'd ever attack a horse.
like that. What you mean, planting it into the soil? And
I think that's what they
Oh.
used to. The Romans used to use pikes for and things like that. Would that
mean,
be
look,
similar?
to be honest, in warfare, I guess there aren't any particular rules.
No,
Then
they're
see what's
not.
effective, what works, under
Yeah.
the circumstances. For atarashii Naginata, because it's a sport, it has very prescribed movements. So we'd never have been in a position where we'd plant it against the ground,
Yeah.
just because it makes it harder to move out. If you imagine that, say, the stone break or the Ishizuki actually had all metal spikes stuck into something.
Yep.
Yeah, so back to the original question, which is changing distance. So
Yep.
if we're starting here, what we're doing, and this is again about the backhand, we're not stretching out and doing that because it takes a lot of time. We use this backhand to pull it through the front. And then we want to go the other way. So now this is some of the hard way to explain is sometimes the power comes from the limb that is furthest from the direction you want to get to. So this goes for our footwork as well. So if I'm doing a kuridashi, I'm stepping forward with my left foot, but the power's coming from my right foot. When I'm stepping backwards, my left foot's further away from the direction I want to go, but it's also the one powering it. Similar with Kurikomi and kuridashi, my right hand at the moment, this one at the back, what it's going to do, so if I open up my left hand, for example, I pull back with my right hand and just leave this one open so I can then close at the distance I want to go. Now, if I want to go back out to normal distance, my left hand is now going to power it because it's further from the direction I'm going. My right hand is going to open up. A bit hard to see here, but
can you do that one more time? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Do you mind?
No. Yeah, I might do it with the broomstick handle so you can see a little bit cleaner. So if I'm here, so if I want to pull this way towards me. So my right hand is now going to be the power hand. I open up the left hand. So my right hand goes pull, and then both grasp. If I want to go the other way and shoot it out from me, my left hand at the top is going to be tight. My right hand at the bottom is going to be open. I'm going to pull through until I grab it. So it's basically shooting it between your hands in either direction. So again, if we come back here, so you can see a little bit cleaner, if I want to get the blade closer to me, I'm going to pull with the hand furthest from it. So my right hand, this hand is now open. I drag it through. If I want to go the other way, I want to push it away from me. My left hand, which is now closest to the blade, but furthest from the hub where I want to be, I'm going to grasp with this front hand. Sorry, it's a little bit glary. My right hand at the back is going to be open, and I toss it through. So trying to do it slowly is pull and grasp, pull and grasp, pull and grasp, pull and grasp. That kind of makes sense?
It does. Hang on. I think I've got. So, do you love my Nagata, by the way?
It's great. It's great. Listen, I've disassembled a broom for the short version.
So it's
Anything can be used.
Sorry, this hand I'm going to pull.
So your right hand at the back, yeah, you're going to pull with that right hand and pull it that right hand behind you to generate that force.
Yep.
So
And this one's the one I'm struggling with. So this one I'm pushing with this one. I'm pushing this one.
Doing kuridashi is a lot harder because we're not used to, especially for right hand dominant, using our left hand to go that way. You probably find if you're in the other kamae, it'll be a little bit easier because your right hand will be forward. And then you'll find Kurikomi a little bit harder. So again, if I'm starting with my right hand at the back, left hand in front, the right hand one is generally said the easy one. We're pulling the weapon towards us or the blade towards us. The left hand, we're not used to throwing something out in that kind of position. So don't worry if this one's a little bit harder, it does take longer. But grip with the front hand, the left hand, and just extend out. So extend out, extend out. And then what you need to do is start, when you do the extension, is think about letting go of it. And that'll make it a little bit easier. Because all we're really doing is we're pushing it forward, but then we're letting go of the weapon at the same time. So I'm pulling it back, but I'm letting go of the weapon at the same time.
Gotcha. I think I might have a bit of a practice on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did have another question. So around that blocking that we did, and I promise you, I only practice these things in the dojo. It's not going to go anywhere else. But when we were blocking and we had our knuckles at the top of the weapon, my first thought was, well, why don't I just turn the weapon sideways and take the knuckles out?
I mean, you could. I mean, absolutely could. A lot of these defenses we're showing you is, again, this is from atarashii Naginata. It's a sports style. So again, prescriptive movements and blocking and strikes, especially with shiai. So yeah, you could absolutely turn the blade, but it's having enough time. Again, if you remember that with a real weapon, this would be very, very heavy. So once you start movement, it's very hard to stop it.
Gotcha.
Because all that weight is there. Because we're using wooden and bamboo versions, it's much easier to change direction, but it's still very hard if you want to alter the rotation completely. So I'll just give you a bit of an example here. So sometimes when we're making an attack, I might pretend to go for men,
yeah,
but they're blocking it. So I let it drop down and go to snei instead.
Yeah.
Gravity will help with that.
Yeah.
Or if I try to do it the other way and I'm going for snei and they block it, it's much harder for me to come back up to men. Gravity is going to fight my momentum. My body's already going forward. It's much harder to pull it back up there. Similarly, if I'm going for a men cut here, so Furikaeshi men, again, that weight is coming down the front. So trying to catch or alter it to get their knuckles is a lot harder. I mean, you could do it if you've got quite a lot of technique, like good technique and control. But again, when we're doing it for atarashii or shiai, you don't actually want to hurt your partners or your competition.
Oh, no. I don't want to hurt anyone at all.
But it's a good question.
I think I didn't explain it very well though. So when you actually, you're doing the block and the person's actually hit and they've actually touched the block. Okay. So I've struck
you talking about
block.
Me going?
Yep. I'm actually, it's weapon on weapon. Why can't I just slide along the weapon and take the knuckles out from the side? No, the person who's doing the hitty bit.
Okay. I mean, again, you could. There's absolutely not reason not to. What we try and teach you is to have enough control that you go through the center. Because again, you don't want to hurt your partner. But yeah, if you were doing it in a real battle or a real fight, yeah, absolutely. Your entire purpose isn't about cutting the weapon. It's useless. You want to go for the body parts.
Okay.
But these are more techniques that you might use. Someone's coming at you really fast. You might block it. You might be off to the side. You might be off to here. It's just giving you a little bit more time maybe make a counter
the
attack
next
or get
thing.
out of the way.
So you wouldn't be standing there like you're standing there going, take my knuckles out. You'd be
No.
moved on.
Oh yeah, then it's kind of a last resort. So someone's coming at me and they're really close in, catch, and maybe it's come down for snag. So it's, I mean, the blocks are there because you need to protect something more important. In this case, my head.
Yes.
They might take off a few fingers, but I could still fight.
Well,
Or if they took off my hand, for example, or incapacitated that hand, a lot of people who would be carrying a Naginata would have a secondary weapon, a tanto, like a short blade in their kukogi, in their obi. So you drop the Naginata and move on to the next weapon. Really.
No,
yeah, absolutely.
that's
There's literally
awesome.
no reason you couldn't aim for the fingers if you were doing this as more martial style.
I think I need to learn the rules a little bit better. I've done things like my Baran where there are no rules, and I guess I just need to work out what you can and you can't do and in this sport. So
and that's what we teach you. So don't stress about that too much. What we're trying to teach you here is how to safely attack and defend, so that when you get into Shiai, those come naturally to you. Because it is a sport, and the idea of this sport is you're not there to hurt people. You're there to show off this technique.
Your skill.
Yeah, because it's not like a body combat sport where, again, you might have a few less holds, but this one has very specific delineation. So everything we do should show a threat. It should show intent. It shouldn't show you hurting the other person. So you should be able to show that if I wanted to, I could. So even with that block and that cutting technique, you're showing that you can still aim for their head online. You could if you chose to go for their fingers, but you're not going to. So it's about showing that the potential is there. You're choosing not to in order to continue the sport, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Because if you hurt people, then they're unable to train with you for a while.
Oh, no. I have accidentally, and it's always been an accident. I've maybe once or twice, and then it's like I felt awful afterwards. And there's so much apologizing, so it's not worth it.
Accidents happen, and this is one of the reasons that I generally don't have beginners trying anything particularly fast, especially against each other. I want to make sure that they can control their movements and their blocks. Like all of the seniors in this group, I would have no problem if they misjudged where they were cutting, or if I forgot to block in the right position. I would absolutely trust they could stop it that far away from me.
Gotcha. So it's
I
all
have
about
yeah, and that's the Tenouchi we're talking about, which is just that grip at the end of a strike. So basically what's happening here, so if this is my front hand, I'm doing a cut, my Tenouchi is basically the wrapping to stop it. And in that action, because it's not a slow thing, it's a sharp one, it stops the movement. And so
you're
it's learning
actually
to judge.
twisting your wrist a little bit on that, aren't you?
Sorry?
You're twisting your wrist so it's up, facing up.
So when we're in Naginata, what we do is the basic stance is you want to think that you're wringing the neck of the Naginata. So if you have a dirty rag between here, you're rotating and wringing it. I'm just going to let Shannon join in a second. So you always want to have your wrists over the top.
Gotcha.
And
that's what I wasn't doing. I was trying to stop it just using my hand, and that wasn't working.
Yeah, so it's about that lock feature. So when we're doing a men cut, like Furikaeshi men, for example, so this front hand comes up, it slides down the weapon, but we want to stop it. And we can only stop it by gripping. What you'll actually find is when I do that grip, is a little bit of rotation in the elbow, as well as the wrist, so that instead of just being over the top, it's locked over the top of the weapon. And that helps extend that front hand a little bit, that elbow, but it also just arrests the movement of the weapon.
Beautiful. So I'm going to hang my head in shame, and I did come home and I did practice it a couple of nights, but not every night. But I would really love your take on what else would be useful to make sure that this is something that becomes part of my life, I guess, because I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad you did.
So obviously in lockdown, and I'm doing my running and everything. But what other
Techniques or practices?
what other exercises, techniques would you suggest that we do to, I don't know, build the muscle needed?
Well, look, quite easily, broomstick handle will serve you well. If you can get one where you don't have the head of the broom or the mop, it'll make it easy for the balance portion.
Okay.
Really just things like the Kurikomi and kuridashi that we talked about, because that's a very good way of learning to feel the balance of the weapon and finding where the back end of your weapon is.
Okay.
So you start learning that control. And the nice thing about that too is it also trains Tenouchi. So that closing of the fist to stop the movement.
Okay.
So as I could pretty much, wish I had something I could draw on this with, or something you could see a visible line on. But if you imagine that I want to stop, I can see this little brown line here, but
Yeah.
about my elbow distance from, or my forearm distance from the end of the weapon. So
Getting that stopping. Okay.
yeah. So even if you have the handle, put a little bit of tape at different points. You can practice. I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there. And you'll start getting that Tenouchi feel. You start going, okay, grip, 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 to stop that movement.
That's a really
things
good
like-
idea.
So things like those basic cuts we went through. So the Furikaeshi movement. Again, it doesn't matter that this is not a Naginata. It's about body faces forward. And now think about this hand here, this case my right hand, making that big arc down around from the top of my head to here. And that'll help you find where the power is coming from. The power generation is from that back hand. So you can even do it one-handed, go lift it up and bring it down.
Okay.
Just keep the back hand on there, up, down. And you'll feel the gravity a bit more because your left hand or your front hand isn't supporting that movement. Okay. And again, you can do that on the other side. So it's good to do it from the other kamae, the left hand back as well. And this is easier than doing it with a Naginata, I promise you. So it's a good way to start.
I will, yes, I feel like I'm taking over. I saw someone else on the call.
That's Kalen. So he's one of our other seniors. You didn't get to meet him last week. Because he's practicing for orchestra at the moment. So Kalen, Effie, I think you met on the last Zoom session we did anyway. So we've mostly been talking about sort of more theoretical and technical stuff, which is actually very useful because it's much easier to demonstrate on Zoom. So Kalen, feel free to pipe in at any point on this discussion. So
will do.
Yeah. So going through your kamae, going through your footwork. So even just something as simple as holding the broomstick and trying to keep it motionless as you walk. And that's about keeping this backhand locked in against the body, keeping your knees bent so you can absorb the movement, and just keeping that front arm relaxed. The tighter it is, the more it's going to be inclined to wobble or show wobble. So if I clench here, it moves more with my body. If I have the front hand a little bit looser, it can absorb some of that movement as well. So just practicing footwork. And again, do this on both sides, so both kamae. Working through the different cuts. So again, you've already looked at the Furikaeshi, so through, use that back hand. For hustle, it's a really good way to practice just going hands together, hand to the ear. And then this hand on the hip is going to move into your sternum as you rotate. So things like that, that'll actually just get the muscle memory going. Even if all you're doing is going, okay, hustle to chudan, to hustle to chudan. Because the more you do that, the more it builds into the muscle memory. Same thing from going to geidan, so from chudan to geidan, chudan to geidan. And again, I'm making sure each time it's locking against my body here, it's locking against my body here, against the sternum, against the hip. And that's something you can do very easily with a broomstick handle or a mop handle, and still get a very good muscle memory attribution.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so things like that, kurikomi, kuridashi, just the basic cuts, the basic footwork, those few stances. Even as they're doing the block, so coming from here, step back and step forward. Step back. So it's about rotating on that back leg, that back hip. This one's not stepping away. All it's doing is it's rotating on the ball of the foot. So it's literally just going from here to here, and you bring the other foot to join it. It's one of those things where you also want the lower body to be very tight at the end. So you can see I've got my knees together, my thighs together, my toes together. I'm locking it all up, pulling up through the body, extending that through my core. So that when I'm here, I've got a very strong position. They're not going to be able to force that down easily. Not that they should be, but it just helps you start using your core as much as anything else to bring it all together.
Beautiful. So I'm going to go and buy myself my very first broom handle and start practicing that.
Yeah, you can do it without a weapon. Obviously, like kuridashi, it's harder without a broom handle or something. So you can mentally just play with the idea. There are obviously some things where it's nice to have something tactile.
I think in my brain it makes sense to have something to hold so my position's right. Otherwise, arms and legs are all going to be in wonky places.
Look, there's nothing wrong with the mop I saw you using before.
Okay.
It's the mop head is probably just going to create a bit more of an issue for you in terms of the weight, the balance will be better. But there's nothing wrong with using it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
More questions. I really have a whole list. Trust me, there's miles and miles of them. So I know that in some sport, or in judo, you have a tokiwaza, which is your favorite movement or something like that, and you're taught that movement is what you're sort of almost your go-to from wherever you're standing. You should be able to throw that one movement and win. Is it the same in this martial art where you learn one really well, or are you trying to learn everything?
You're trying to learn everything. I mean,
Okay.
there's going to be different stances and different cuts that you'll like more than others, and you'll be able to do better than the other ones. And that's normal. Everyone's got a favorite. I love hustle. I love Furikayashi. The problem for Furikayashi is it's not particularly practical. The amount of time it takes to go from here to here is a lot more than going there. So in terms of Shia, it's not a practical cut, but I love the feel of it. I can just, windmill all day, quite frankly. It feels nice. Same thing with Hasa. It's a wonderful position and cut.
Yes. Well, Furikaeshi is also very situationally specific. It's kind of essentially it's to be used when your opponent is trying to sweep your weapon out of the way, and you go with their momentum, switch the weapon around, and then strike them. And that is kind of shown in the Shikake Oji Waza, which is what we call the first set of kata. As it's a movement that you often see is that you'll attempt to strike, they'll block, try to sweep you out of the way, and then you'll switch hands and do the Furikaeshi, and then you'll be able to strike them.
So for example, if I've blocked men here, so I'm protecting my men, or protecting my does, probably a better version there. So I'm down here. Sorry, no, I've cut low, or I've cut men. So we're crossing blade to blade. What they might do is actually what we call a harai, which is a deflection. So if they deflect my weapon down to my left, it's a natural progression for me to use that momentum and turn it into Furikayashi, and then make it an attack from there. So you really have to imagine that someone is, say, they've deflected my blade, I've made an attack or what have you, they've deflected it, it's already going down behind me. So I may as well use that power that they've provided me to make an attack.
So it really depends on what the other person's doing as to what you should be throwing, and you work off what they're doing. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's something that we try and teach a little bit later on when you know a few more blocks, a few more cuts. Early on when we start, we'll tell you, okay, this is the pattern. Someone's going for men, and then you're going to your block, and then after the block, you're going to go for snake. So for example, someone's cut Furiagate men, I've blocked, and my follow-up is to step off the line and cut snake. But that's a kind of prescribed pattern. We say, okay, this is what happens as an attack. You block, you counterattack. So you know what's coming. Then later on, once you're a little bit more comfortable and confident, we'll pair you up with someone, generally a senior, where they'll go a bit slower, but they might not tell you what the attack is. They might say, there'll be a men cut. You don't know which one. You can just decide how to defend it. And then you have to come up with your own counterattack. We kind of try and build up those skills so that you start taking the techniques you've learned and going, okay, it feels natural now, I've done this block, to go for that opening because it's now there.
So there is some randori and some kata.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
So in Naginata practice, yeah, because randori is the name in judo, right?
Oh, there's a different name?
I thought, yeah, there is actually a different
I
name.
have no idea.
Yeah, there are, yeah, because I mean, obviously, for general practice, we like obviously for any sort of practice, we would call it something keiko, basically, you know, kata practice, kata geiko, and now there's also there's shiai, which is competition matches, but then there's also things like jigeiko and kakari geiko. Hi. Yeah. Kakari geiko is a type of practice where your senior will present openings, either very obvious openings or more subtle openings, and you're expected to respond and strike the open area. Yeah. So that's kakari geiko. So it's kind of designed to. It's not about like two people going aggressively against each other. But it's more one person trying to train another to identify openings, I think would be one way to describe it.
It's basically teaching someone to not to train without a prescribed pattern. It's, as Kaylin said, it's to help them go, okay, let's look at the person holistically. Their men is open, their kote is open, their snare is open. How do I best attack it? And they go, how do I follow up? Or what's my next move? So not just one strike, but subsequent strikes. So it's, again, just training that mentality so you're not actively thinking about your technique or the attack each time. You start naturally going, oh, men, snare, kote is there. Oh, do, Furikaeshi men, nodo. So it's not about taking an exact pattern. It's about being able to react to the situation. Yes,
Okay.
that was good explanation for that one, Kevin.
No,
And
that
also
was awesome.
Jigeko, which is generally where people are basically practicing technique with each other. So it's not one person's opening and one person's receiving. It's you're both doing a little bit of that, but it's not shiai, it's not competition. So you're allowing both of you to practice technique. So if someone attacks men, you can block it and then you might follow up with a technique, but it's not about going full out at each other necessarily. It's about practicing technique in a situation where everything is random and unstructured. And then you have shiai, which is basically there's no script. You bow in and you just see who
go for it. Yeah.
Go for it. I like it. Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, there's all these different levels for Naginata, just in terms of
have to start off at the beginning. I realize that. We're not very good at that. I guess the last question I have, unless is it Kaylin? Unless you want to ask questions, right. I feel like taking over.
No. At the moment, I'm okay. Actually, I was just enjoying the discussion.
We don't get all that many chances to talk theory, so this is actually quite nice.
Good. So I know you've shown me some of the techniques. I guess it's linking those techniques together that in my fuzzy little brain I'm trying to get, and whether or not you are on a weapon that length, whether or not you're actually able to fake doing something and then switch it to something else, because in my brain, because it's so long, you telegraph that well and truly before you actually do it, but I could be wrong.
That's true.
It's a technique I know Kaylin quite enjoys.
It was it is kind of possible. I'll see if I can just grab a weapon. It will be a bit difficult.
I can demonstrate if you like.
Yeah.
You can advise. For example,
to fake you can try and fake an attack to the head and then go down the legs. Yeah, that's one is possible. Well, yeah, it depends how you think, because obviously you think it's a long weapon, it's a very, very heavy weapon. I think one thing that distinguishes this as more of a sporting practice than like a martial practice or practice about killing is that like the weapon that we practice with, the one that has the bamboo, is a very, very light weapon. And so it allows you to move it in a very, very whippy and light way. And so it makes feints very easily. I can imagine using an authentic real Naginata, it would be incredibly hard, well, just to move it at all, because they can be several kilograms, the real ones. I've only ever seen one before in my life. But yeah, so real ones, yeah. It's the real ones, it would be quite tricky to do. This, because of the practice in general, it was created in the 1950s, sort of more as a sporting or recreational, or occasionally perhaps spiritual practice, mostly directed towards Japanese schoolgirls. So basically to give them something to give it a sort of a vitality to their practice and like their sporting lives, I think. It's kind of what it's often directed at. That's kind of what this Naginata practice is. Yeah.
I mean, it had started being introduced to schools, or I think it was around the early 90s, because a lot of the sports styles were sort of coming into play. Then again, as Karen said, they wanted to give their youth something physical that also has very mental and meditational aspects to it, but physically, mentally, emotionally. Obviously, when the war came, post-war, part of the agreements were these things would not be taught.
Gotcha.
They were a martial weapon.
Yeah.
It was about 1952, I think. So it wasn't actually all that long after the war and that agreement. They actually allowed it to sort of come back in a very stylized sports style. So kendo, naginata, judo, all these different styles as a very prescribed sport. So it still has a lot of the technique and the styling and the mentality from pre-war, but it's very scripted in a way. And that's the same for basically all the budo. You can learn slightly different styles of all these. So like Naginata, there's a whole lot of koryu styles out there. And they're basically techniques and styles that are passed down through pretty much family lines.
Okay.
Yeah, like you know how it's in a similar way, Kano, because I can imagine you're a judo practitioner, right?
I may have dabbled.
Yes. You see, so I suppose you've probably heard that Kano Jigoro developed judo by practicing various older traditional styles of jujutsu, and then he took what he learned, and then with a practice group of lots of very enthusiastic students, he sort of developed lots of techniques of judo by combining things that he'd learned from other traditional schools. It was kind of a vaguely similar idea where there were practitioners in Japan in the early 20th century who they were learning the traditional Naginata schools. And one reason that they wanted to develop modern style was that, like, if you go from one school to another, the practice completely and utterly changes in every way. The size of the Naginata, the mindset, the weapons, it's different.
Techniques, what was allowed.
Yeah.
There was no standard curriculum.
Yeah, that's one thing. And another thing is that often when you look at Naginata kata, they're against a sword, like a swordsman or someone wielding a sword. That makes it difficult. Well, it was thought that it made it quite difficult because if you're trying to learn the kata, you really have to understand how two weapons work, not just one. So they said, fine, we'll try and create some sort of standardized sort of curriculum that involves Naginata against Naginata. And so, yeah, that was what like these sort of younger practitioners who sort of learned this traditional stuff did. And it was eventually adopted again in the 1950s, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, basically you had all these schools coming together, all these styles for various weapons, and basically bodging together a standard curriculum. And even in Japan today, depending on which part of the island or which precinct you come from, there are slight variations. Mostly in the way the sensei might teach, or they might talk about a specific technique. There's very small differences. And you actually get that in a lot of the budo because it's such a widespread thing. Is that there's the whole thing in America where they will use the butt of the weapon, Ishizuki, to make head strikes, which no one else in the world allows. because it's a bad idea. It's dangerous. You cannot be sure of not seriously damaging someone with that, because that's a fully oak part of the weapon. So in America, it has been allowed, but nowhere else. So it's again that kind of difference in mentality.
You mean in the most litigious country in the world, they've decided they won't even let me ski off piste in America. They annoy me.
So yeah, you'll find with most Budo, there's, depending on who's teaching you or where you're learning, there is a variation.
Okay.
So the way I teach is quite open. I basically say, if you're in front of a different sensei, what they say goes. And that's going to be really annoying, because it may be very different to how you've learned the technique. But it's very much a case of whoever is teaching you at the time, take on board what they have to say, because even though it might be different to what you've learned, you may find it very, very useful, or it may suit you better. Of course, it also means that when you go in front of a different sensei, it may change again. There are certain standards. So what we're teaching you is basically standards, but each sensei or senpai or school will have a few little variants, not enough to make it a big problem, but enough that, again, if you go in front of them and you're in a class with a different group, they'll say, that's not how you do it this way. There might be a slight change.
No, I get that even when I'm trying to do burpees.
Yeah.
I don't know
Everyone's
how
got
many
a different
things
idea.
Yeah.
I hate burpees.
We'll just go with what they say.
So it's very common to find variants in a lot of the Budo. And it's very hard to combat that, quite frankly. I know Jukendo tries, and that's one of the other styles I teach in that as well. They literally have a seminar every year for all the senior instructors in Japan that they're expected to go to, and go over the basics and have them checked, so that they know that everyone they teach gets the same thing. And that mostly works because Jukendo is mostly isolated to Japan. It's only recently come outside of Japan, but we're all being taught by people who are going through that annual kind of process. So it's much more consistent in that area than a lot of the other Budo are. But yeah, just expect variations. And again, this is why I also say that if something is not working for you, we will try and adjust it to your body, because we've all got different forearm lengths and body and torso. I'm more typically sized for a Japanese woman. I'm not a Japanese woman, but my physique is a lot closer than most of the people in our group. So the standards work well for me. They're not going to work so well for everyone. So we adjust it as we go.
That's brilliant. I will let you know as soon as I feel something isn't working, but I haven't found that yet. I have one last, I guess it's more a favor than anything else, because you showed us some kata the other day, and I think you said it went up to 16?
So there's 8 shidachi or kata.
Okay.
Once you've mastered those, there is another set of kata, which is the zenichi or zenihon kata. Again, another 8 of those, but they actually use a slightly different weapon. They're full oak. They're a bit heavier than the full oak one I've got here. And they're a little bit more aggressive. They're beautiful, but you have to have the timing down and the techniques down right. Because with a full oak weapon, if you mistime it, you could hurt someone. Whereas with the bamboo and oak one, it's less of an issue.
Yeah, no, definitely don't want to hurt anyone. What I was hoping, and I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, I know you showed us the first kata and you said we pretty much learned all the moves. Would you be able to maybe pop a link on or something so I could start learning that? Would that be too weird?
I mean, I can show you the attacker's side now if you want, quite easily. So generally you'll learn both sides of it, but obviously when you don't have someone to block against, it doesn't make sense. So if you're doing Ipponme, kata number 1, as the shidachi, which is the attacker, or generally the junior, you start in kamae or chunokamai. You're going to go furiagate, then you're then going to change into hasa no kamae, and you're going to do hasa snake. You're literally going to wait there while your oji steps out of the line, goes into hasa and does a men cut. They then draw their naginata down the line of your body. They retreat, at which point you step back, bring your hands together at the center of the weapon, and then step forward again, left forward, so you're back in your normal kamae. And your partner, who will be the senior role, will walk you back for each ni, san, shi. That's Ipponme. So
that's awesome.
furiagate, men, passo, snake, the weight of it. You push off the right leg, which is your forward leg, step back, step forward to the left leg, and you retreat 4 steps. That's Ipponme. Now, if you were the receiver, so they're over there, they're going to kuriagate men. I'm going to do Kurikomi. So I'll use my right hand to pull my Naginata back, my hands up by the sendanmaki. This is the men block. They're going to do hasso snake. I'm going to turn and block snake. From here, I'm again going to do a shift. So I'll just change this. What will happen is I'll do a kuridashi. I'm going to pull up the weapon. So I'm back up here. And I'm going to go for men. Hasso men.
So
I draw the Naginata down as I step back, each back. My partner is step back, and I walk them back, each knee, san, shi. So it's a little bit harder to do the oji roll. It's much easier when you can feel that partnership. But the attack roll is, as I said, very easy. So kuriagate men, hasso snake, and then you wait. And then you step back and you walk back. We're going to let the dog back into the house if he wants to go. Nihonme is basically the reverse of that. So the second kata is we still go Furiagate. This time we're going Furiagate snake. And then we're going to pull up, hustle, men. Again, they're going to step back. They'll go into hustle, they'll come to hustle snake, they'll walk back. I step back, step forward, and then I retreat 4 steps. Ich, ni, san, shi. So you can literally practice those 2 attacks without any real issues. So again, Nihonme, kuriagate, snake, hustle, men, you wait. You push off the right leg to step back, step forward the left leg, and you retreat. And that's Ipponme and Nihonme.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
This video will be online because I'll just copy what you've just done then.
Look, I'll send through links of other stuff that's around too. I'm just going to move indoors because it's starting to rain a little bit, and I don't need the laptop getting wet. But did you have any other questions?
I will have millions of them, but I've noticed it is also time, and I know that it is a weekend, and I'm sure people have other beautiful things that they want to be doing.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
But I have to say there was some great questions there, Effie, so I'm really glad you took the time to ask them. And I hope you found the answer useful.
Sorry, no, yes, I found that and it was amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If we're still not done next week, we'll be back to this again. So let's think about more questions.
I know I've got a list of them. Trust me, they're all. I've just reeled through the top few. There's a whole lot more if we need them. Thank you so much. So that was awesome.
All right.
Have a beautiful weekend, everyone. I will see you next week.
All right.
Yep, indeed. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.